All right, step back from the vehicle. Identification. Now.
I'm cooperating. I'm a sheriff.
Verify that. Turn around. Don't make this difficult. You're making a mistake.
You people always think you're above the law.
Record everything.
The blue and red lights hit the gas station like a slap. Engines idled. Doors opened. Hands went to belts. In less than 30 seconds, a quiet stop for fuel on the south side of Atlanta turned into a scene that would shake the city, embarrass a federal agency, and later cost taxpayers $13.9 million. All because a black man stood beside his car while wearing the wrong skin in the wrong place at the wrong time. Before I continue, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, please subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The night air smelled like gasoline and hot rubber. The station was open, but barely alive. One cashier behind thick glass. A few cars moving past on the road. The man had pulled in to fill his tank after a long day. He wore plain clothes. No uniform. No badge on display. Just jeans, a jacket, and a calm posture that came from years of being trained not to panic. A white SUV rolled in fast, then another. No sirens. No warning. Men stepped out wearing tactical gear with bold letters across their chests. Immigration enforcement. They spread out the way people do when they already believe they are right. One agent pointed. Another circled behind. A third stood near the driver's door of the man's car. Identification, one voice said. Short, cold. The man didn't argue. He reached slowly. He knew the rules. He had enforced them himself for years. He handed over his ID. It didn't matter. The agent stared at the card for half a second too long. His eyes went from the name to the face and back again. Something didn't fit the story he had already decided on. Step away from the vehicle, the agent said. The man asked why. The answer came sharp. Because I said so. That was the moment things tipped. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet shift where dignity met suspicion. The agents said they were conducting an immigration operation. They claimed they had reason to believe the man was in the country illegally. There was no warrant shown. No explanation that made sense. Just pressure. The man stayed calm. He said he was a law enforcement officer. A sheriff. He said it clearly. He said it without pride. Just a fact. One agent laughed. Another agent looked around, as if checking whether anyone was filming. Don't play games, one of them said. The tone carried something heavy. Something old. The man offered to show his credentials. He explained where he worked. He named the county. He told them to call it in. They didn't. Instead, they moved closer. Hands tightened. Voices dropped lower. The kind of low that means control, not calm. Bystanders started to notice. A woman pumping gas slowed down. A man near the ice machine pulled out his phone. The agents noticed that too. Turn around, an agent said. The man hesitated for a second, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. He had put people in handcuffs before. He knew what came next. Turn around now, the agent repeated. They cuffed him. Cold metal. Tight. Too tight. He said so. They ignored him. One agent searched him. Another leaned close and spoke quietly, so only he could hear. You people always think you're above the law. The words were soft, but they cut deep. They placed him in the back of the SUV. The door shut hard. The lock clicked. The gas pump still ran, fuel spilling onto the concrete. Inside the vehicle, the man sat still. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He stared straight ahead and focused on breathing. He knew panic would only make things worse. Minutes passed, then more. Radio chatter crackled. Names were run. Databases checked. Then the tone changed. One agent stepped away from the group. He spoke into his radio again, slower this time. His face tightened. Another agent walked over, confused. He asked a question under his breath. The first agent nodded once. They opened the door. The cuffs came off, fast now. Too fast. No apology. No explanation. You can go, one agent said. The man asked for their names. They refused. He asked why he was detained. No answer. He asked who would clean the spilled gas. Silence. The SUVs pulled away like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The man stood there alone, heart pounding, hands shaking just enough that he noticed. He was trained for danger. He had faced armed suspects. He had walked into violent homes. But this was different. This was being erased in real time. The next morning, his wrists were bruised. Purple. Yellow. Proof. He reported the incident. Internally at first. Then higher again. At first, the response was slow. Polite emails. Promises to look into it. Weeks passed. Then video surfaced. A short clip. Shaky. Shot from behind a gas pump. It showed the takedown. The cuffs. The words whispered close to his ear. The clip spread. People were angry. Not surprised. Just angry. Civil rights attorneys stepped in. Records were requested. Training manuals. Body cam policies. Operation orders. The story grew teeth. Investigators found that the agents had no legal reason to detain him. No warrant. No active lead connected to him. Nothing but assumption. And assumption, it turned out, had a price. The case went to court. The arguments were sharp and simple. You cannot grab a man because of how he looks. You cannot ignore his credentials. You cannot strip dignity and call it enforcement. The jury listened. They saw the video. They heard about the whisper. They saw the bruises. They understood the fear. The verdict landed heavy. $13.9 million. Not for spilled gas, not for embarrassment, but for the message sent that night. The message that said authority without restraint is dangerous. And this was only the beginning. Because once the money was awarded, a bigger question exploded across the country. How many times did this happen when no one was filming? The money made headlines, but the damage started long before the check was written. By the time the verdict dropped, the man's life had already split into a before and an after. Before the gas station, after the cuffs, after the whisper. After the world saw what he had lived with his whole life, but never expected to face in uniform-adjacent silence. He didn't ask for fame. He didn't want his face everywhere. But once the video went viral, there was no pulling it back. News vans parked outside his home. Reporters called his phone nonstop. Some wanted justice. Others wanted controversy. A few wanted to know if he had provoked the agents just by standing there. That question followed him everywhere. At work, things shifted. Not officially. Not on paper. But in the hallways and meetings, the air felt different. Some colleagues avoided eye contact. Others whispered praise but never out loud. A few made jokes they thought were harmless. Guess ICE didn't get the memo, one said, laughing. The man didn't laugh. He filed the lawsuit not out of anger, but out of obligation. He said it clearly to his lawyers. If this could happen to him, with training and authority and proof in his pocket, then it could happen to anyone. The legal process was slow and exhausting. Depositions dragged on for hours. The agents were questioned one by one. Their stories didn't line up. One said he thought the man was nervous. Another said he matched a description. Another couldn't explain the whisper at all. When asked why they ignored his claim of being a sheriff, one agent answered flatly, "People lie." The courtroom went quiet. The judge didn't react. The jury did. Emails were uncovered. Internal messages sent after the incident. Jokes. Shrugs. No discipline. No concern. One message stood out. A supervisor wrote, "Next time, confirm before cuffs." Next time. The city felt that word like a punch. Community leaders spoke out. Churches held meetings. Parents talked to their kids again about hands, voices, silence. The same talks they had been having for generations. But this time, something was different. This time, the man wasn't a statistic. He wasn't unnamed. He wasn't unarmed and unknown. He was trained. He was verified. He was still targeted. That scared people more than any headline. At the trial, the man finally spoke publicly. Not in anger. Not in tears. Just facts. He described the lights, the voices, the way the cuffs cut into his skin, the way the agent leaned in close. When he repeated the words spoken to him, there was no emotion in his voice. That made it worse. The defense tried to shift blame. They said the agents were under pressure. They said immigration enforcement was chaotic. They said mistakes happen. The man's attorney asked one question. Would this have happened if he were white? No answer came. Outside the courthouse, protests formed. Some supported the verdict. Others called it excessive. Online comments turned ugly fast. $13.9 million for feelings. One wrote. The man read those comments late at night. Alone. He didn't respond. He just closed the screen and sat in the dark. What people didn't see was the toll. The way he flinched when SUVs slowed near him. The way he checked mirrors more often. The way his kids asked why people on TV were yelling about their dad. He kept showing up to work. He kept doing his job. But something had cracked. The federal agency released a statement. Carefully worded. No apology. Just regret for procedural errors. Procedural. As if dignity were a checkbox. Training reviews were announced. Policy updates promised. The same promises made before. But internally, agents were angry. Some felt betrayed. Some felt exposed. One anonymous agent spoke to a reporter and said, "We're being punished for doing our jobs." That sentence spread fast. The public response was sharp. Your job isn't to guess, one activist said on live TV. Your job isn't to assume. The man stayed mostly silent during this phase. He could said what he needed to say in court. The verdict spoke louder. But then came the appeals talk. The agency hinted at fighting the payout, dragging it out, making it harder. That's when the man made a decision. He agreed to sit for a longer interview. No shouting. No drama, just his story, start to finish. When asked what hurt the most, he didn't mention the cuffs. He said, the certainty. They were certain I didn't belong. That clip played everywhere. And something shifted again. Lawmakers started asking questions. Oversight committees called hearings. Body cam rules were revisited. Some quietly, some loudly. The case stopped being about one gas station. It became a mirror. And not everyone liked what they saw. Because behind the $13.9 million was a truth no payout could erase. The badge on your chest doesn't protect you when the bias is already made up. The hearings were supposed to be routine. That's what the officials said. Just questions. Just reviews. Just another case file in a tall stack of cases. But everyone in the room knew that wasn't true. This case had already escaped the building. It lived in living rooms now. On phones. In group chats. In the quiet anger people carried to work every morning. The man sat at the long table under bright lights. Cameras lined the wall. Lawmakers leaned forward, some curious, some defensive. A few already had their minds made up. He raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. He didn't speak fast. He didn't slow down either. He told the story the same way every time. Gas station, lights, orders, cuffs, whisper. When asked why he didn't resist, he answered plainly, "Because I wanted to live." That sentence hung in the air longer than any argument. One official asked if he thought the agents were racist. The man paused, just long enough to make the room uncomfortable. "I think they saw my skin before they saw my ID." No yelling followed. No gasps, just silence. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. The agency was scrambling. Emails flew. Meetings stacked on meetings. Lawyers warned that this case could open doors they didn't want opened. Because if one stop was illegal, how many others were too? Requests for records poured in from across the country. Advocacy groups filed motions. Journalists dug deeper. Patterns started to appear. Stops without warrants. Detentions without cause. Reports that never made it into official logs. And in the middle of it all was the man who just wanted to fill his tank and go home. The appeal was filed quietly. No press release. No announcement, just paperwork. But the public found out anyway. When the appeal became known, anger flared again. People felt played. Like the agency was saying, "We hear you, but not enough to stop." The man's legal team prepared for another long fight. They warned him it could take years. They warned him it would be draining. He didn't hesitate. "Then we go again," he said. Those 4 words spread almost as fast as the original video. Support came from unexpected places. Retired officers, veterans, even a few former federal agents who said privately, "This crossed a line." But backlash came too. Hate mail arrived. Threats slipped into his inbox. Some messages told him to go back where you came from. Others said he should have stayed quiet. One message stood out, short, angry. "You forgot your place." He showed it to his kids. Not to scare them, to prepare them. At work, the tension peaked. Leadership released statements about neutrality, about letting the courts decide. But the man noticed how often his name came up in meetings he wasn't invited to. A promotion he had been in line for quietly disappeared. No explanation, just silence. That hurt more than the cuffs. Meanwhile, the agency tried damage control. New training videos were rolled out. Slideshows about bias. Phrases like cultural awareness and community trust filled presentations. But the agents involved in the stop, still working, still armed, still unpunished. That fact lit a fire under the public. A town hall meeting was held in Atlanta. The room overflowed. People stood along the walls. Some held signs. Others held nothing but anger. The man didn't plan to speak. He went to listen. But when a woman stood up and said, "If it can happen to him, it can happen to my son," the room turned toward him. He stood. He didn't raise his voice. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want change that sticks." Someone shouted from the back, "They won't change." He answered without missing a beat. "Then we make them." That line made the news. Behind the scenes, negotiations started. Quiet talks about settling the appeal. Numbers were floated, conditions discussed. The agency wanted the money reduced. The man wanted accountability. They couldn't agree. The appeal hearing finally came. The courtroom felt heavier this time. Less curiosity. More consequence. The judges reviewed the record. The lack of cause. The whisper. the failure to verify, the agency's own policies. One judge asked the agency's attorney a simple question. If he wasn't a sheriff, would this have been acceptable? The attorney tried to answer. He couldn't. When the ruling came down, it was decisive. The verdict stood. The $13.9 million stayed. No reduction. No rewrite. That number echoed across every federal office involved in enforcement. But the real impact came next. A whistleblower stepped forward. An internal document leaked. A list of stops flagged internally but never reported. The language used inside the agency was blunt. Ugly. One line read, "High probability non-citizen based on appearance." The public reaction was explosive. Officials denied it was standard practice. Former agents said otherwise. The man watched it all unfold from his kitchen table. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He looked tired. Because winning didn't erase what happened. It just proved it happened. And now, the country was forced to face a question it had avoided for too long. How much power is too much power when bias goes unchecked? The final fall-up didn't come with sirens or flashing lights. It came quietly, the way real change, or real fear, often does. Meetings were canceled. Policies were rewritten. Careers stalled. And behind closed doors, people who had never been stopped at a gas station began to understand what it felt like to lose control of the story. The $13.9 million was paid. Not all at once, but it was paid. The agency never said the words, "We were wrong." They didn't have to. The number said it for them. For the man, the check didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy. Like proof that something had gone deeply wrong and money was the only language left to explain it. He took time off work. Not because he wanted to, but because his body demanded it. Sleep came in pieces. Loud engines still made his chest tighten. He hated that. He had spent a career teaching others to stay steady under pressure, and now pressure followed him into quiet places. His kids adjusted faster than he did. They learned which questions not to ask in public. They learned why their dad scanned rooms when they went out. They learned that uniforms didn't always mean safety. The agency announced reforms. New verification rules. Mandatory supervisor approval for street detentions. Body cameras required at all times. On paper, it looked solid. But the public had learned something too. They learned that accountability doesn't arrive on its own. It has to be dragged into the light. Other cases surfaced. Some settled quietly. Some didn't. People who had been afraid to speak now had a reference point. A name. A verdict. A number. The man received letters. Handwritten ones. From strangers. From parents. From officers who said they wished they had spoken up sooner. One letter said, "You stood still so others could stand taller." He folded that one and kept it. He also received silence. From people he thought would defend him. From systems he had trusted. That silence was loud. Months later, he returned to the same gas station. Not for a statement. Not for a photo. Just to fill his tank. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. He looked around. Nothing happened. That was the point. No lights. No orders. No hands on belts. Just a man buying gas. He drove away knowing the story would follow him forever. But he also knew something else now. His case had cracked a door that had been sealed shut for decades. Not because he was special, but because what happened to him was common. The agency never disciplined the agents involved publicly. That fact still injured people. But internally, careers stalled. Transfers happened. Files followed names. Power learned it could bleed. The man eventually stepped back from the spotlight. He didn't become a full-time activist. He didn't run for office. He kept doing what he had always done, protecting people where he could, speaking when it mattered, staying quiet when noise would drown the truth. When asked in his final interview what he wanted people to remember, he answered simply, "That I belonged there, from the start." That sentence closed the story better than any verdict. Because the truth was never complicated. He was never illegal, never dangerous, never out of place. He was detained because of how he looked, released because of who he was, and paid because the country finally saw both at the same time. The $13.9 million wasn't the end. It was the receipt.